Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, established about 150 years ago, the LA Board of Supervisors is the largest governing board of its kind at the local level in the country. And today I am delighted to be joined by one of the 5 supervisors, the newest to the Board of Supervisors. In fact, hello, Holly Mitchell.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a freshman again.
You are. Well, but your career in government is pretty impressive as it is. But I'm going to jump in and ask you something that we can get off the table immediately because I'm sure it's a little exhausting. Historic. This entire Board of Supervisors is historic. 5 women sitting in a position in which there's been, mostly men, but a collection of both men and women. From your perspective, has that actually changed the feeling at the table? Because I will say that although we're progressive and although we're doing better as far as that's concerned, I think there is a little bit when I'm sitting at a group of women and we are working on something together, there's a different feeling of security. There's a different feeling of not having to prove my qualifications for being there. Has that kind of happened in the last 6 months with the 5 women that are the Board of Supervisors right now?
Great question. And the interesting thing is we haven't been at the table together. So I've had to onboard in this new amazing opportunity, this new very important position in the middle of a public health pandemic.
True.
And so it wasn't until Juneteenth, literally, that I got to see my entire team, my own staff of 44 that I had to hire and onboard without seeing them all together in person at one time.
Oh, man.
And so we haven't been at the table yet. But I will say this. As you talked about your own experience at the table, I was reminded of a bill that my former colleague, Senator Hannah Beth Jackson from Santa Barbara carried, requiring California companies, private companies, to have women on their board of directors. And so we looked at all the research. Because, tokenism is almost as bad as not being present at all.
Correct.
And the research showed that if you can get 3 women on a board, now you're cooking with grease. And I think it goes back to your point about not being alone, not being in isolation, having someone who can have your back, literally and figuratively, as you try to move an agenda that might reflect a female lens. And so I think that's going to be the same with us. I can't imagine what Supervisor Molina must have faced as the first woman and the only woman on that board all those years.
Right.
I was a young staffer in the legislature and had the pleasure of working for Diane Watson and meeting Roseanne Vuitch, the first woman elected to the state Senate. And to hear her firsthand talk about how she had a little bell at her desk, and when the men would refer to the kind gentleman from, Fremont, she would ring her bell. And all of the nonverbal ways in which women have had to not only find their own seat at the table, but to force those others who sit around at the table that I'm here and that I have to be seen and acknowledged.
Well, you have been seen and acknowledged because you have definitely demonstrated that you are someone who is passionate about the ability to make change from governmental perspectives, and you have been part of the state assembly as well as the state senate, and now you're part of this Board of Supervisors, as I think one of the newspapers I read from back in December called you the Fab Five.
Yes.
So how do you see the difference between state government and local government and what you can and cannot do? I mean, what have you been able to observe so far?
For me, this is where I think I've been preparing my entire career to land in an interesting kind of way. At the state level, and I enjoyed every minute of my 10 years in the state legislature. It really was policy setting at a 10,000-foot level. And so when I think about now what I'm experiencing, coming to the local level of government, county government is the safety net. The county is designed to keep families whole, to keep the bottom from falling out when you think about many of the programs the county operates. It's allowed me to come down from that 10,000-foot level where I set policy to really operationalize. So when I think about my 10 years of experience around child welfare services, foster care, the juvenile detention system, my work to be a poverty disruptor around CalWorks and CalFresh. Those are the programs that the county operates. And so I spent 10 years setting policy, the 10,000 foot level. Now I'm right there at the community level, making sure that the people who call the second district home are able to benefit in a unique and strategic way from those services.
Okay, I'm going to take your metaphor and run with it just a little bit, but I'm going to actually bring it into even more specific. So forget 10,000. So you were looking at you're looking at the exterior of the house.
Yes.
All right, so now you've walked into the house and you've had a chance to kind of tour the house based on what you wanted the house to be from a design standpoint and an architectural standpoint from the state's perspective. How is it looking? Did we build it right? Is it being built right? Are there things that need to be fixed? Does the kitchen need to be renovated again? What's going on?
And so it's so funny. This is my second time having that unique bird's eye view. When I was appointed a CEO of Crystal Stairs,
right.
As a young staffer working for the legislature, I had analyzed for the Senate Health and Human Services Committee several of the bills that created the programs that I then ran as CEO of Crystal Stairs.
Okay.
And so Dion Aroner used to always say to me, Holly, did we get it right? And I'd say, we got some things right, Dion, and some things no. And so I'm having the same experience. Yes, at the 10,000 foot level outside of the house looking in, you think, oh, the kitchen should be angled this way. And now that I'm in the kitchen, I see there's some value in having it angled that way. But given what we're experiencing through this pandemic, if we had just added a second stove, or if we had just done this in policy setting. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just the reality. Not just because I'm at a different level of government, but we're experiencing a very different life experience.
So what are some of the things that you are all five focusing on right now? Where are some of your priorities?
We are focusing on an LA County recovery that's based in equity. All of us are clear that this virus was equal opportunity, and yet there are some communities that suffered at disproportionate rates. Women suffered significantly in terms of job loss. Given our dual role with kids being out of school and childcare being closed, we know women have suffered. So I'm proud of the Women and Girls Initiative that the board established before I got here, and really focused on what we have to do to help women and girls recover in an equitable format. Recognizing that there are communities that, again, disproportionately suffered. And so we have to infuse in those communities, in my humble opinion, a disproportionate investment. And so I look forward to, as a board, as we deliberate our county budget this year and the American Rescue Act funds, about how we make sure that all of LA County recovers. And that's going to require a disproportionate investment in some communities over others.
So considering that budget, lots of news and sometimes a little pushback on the fact that the state at large is in an incredibly positive fiscal situation, which then will also impact, I know the city of Los Angeles is in a pretty positive situation comparatively to what was expected because of all of that federal money. How is that helping? And what are the things that you, as the Board of Supervisors, are cautious about introducing because you can't maintain it?
Well, I had the pleasure of serving on the Budget Committee my entire 10 years in the legislature, and chaired the Senate Budget Committee my last 3 years in the Senate. And, there's one-time dollars, and then there's ongoing dollars. And so the state had $76 billion in excess revenue this year. Most of that one-time, most of the dollars between the CARES Act dollars and the American Rescue Plan dollars are one-time dollars that should be focused on COVID-19 recovery. And so what we have to be mindful of is investing appropriately, investing in one-time expenses. And so that's a balance that I've experienced at the state level. I think it's a pretty bright line in terms of how you divide that. And there's also nuances. You can sometimes pay for with one-time dollars this year expenses, and keep the other side of the ledger whole if those were ongoing expenses. So maybe you save it this year and carry over for the next year in terms of ongoing expenses. So there are all kinds of budget strategies, We used to call them our toolbox in Sacramento, in terms of strategies you can use to really stretch the dollars. But you have to be mindful. You can't set up new programming that has ongoing needs with one-time dollars. You know, one-time dollars are great for construction. Let's build something. Let's build some new housing. The county has a responsibility, particularly when we think about our unhoused family, friends, and neighbors. We have a responsibility for some of them to meet their ongoing needs. When we talk about permanent supportive housing, the supportive side of the equation are those ongoing services. That's not an appropriate use of one-time dollars. To build the facility, yes, but to make sure we have ongoing support services so people can stay housed successfully, that can't be one-time dollars, because those are ongoing needs.
And speaking of the category of unhoused and the ramifications of that, I mean, during your campaign, and I'm going to try to be very clear, I don't want to paraphrase you too much, you spoke not only about dealing with the current homeless issue, but also stopping it from growing in size, and tied directly back to the pandemic again. You know, job loss, there was obviously an opportunity for people not to be evicted because of the laws that were put into place and things like that. But this seems to be one of those untenable problems that everyone pays attention to, definitely feels its importance, has great intent, and continues to have no forward momentum despite all of the good intentions and the enormous amount of money. So from the supervisor's position, how are you looking at that, especially as it continues to grow?
I think, you know, this is an issue I think that every level of government has to figure out, what role do we play, lock arms, and get it done. I had the privilege of leading a Senate delegation to the state of Utah about 10 years ago to look at the model that Utah developed, where they reduced their chronic unhoused population by 90% over 10 years. Now, our population far exceeds Utah, but it was important to understand the strategy and the model they put in place. And the model what struck me about their model was every level of government was on the same page.
Yeah.
Everybody was on the same page. I think we're getting there because the problem has reached such a devastating crescendo that we have to. And, you know, I have to push back a little bit. You know, LAHSA's website, you know, is very clear. For every 200 we house daily, 212 people lose their housing.
There you go.
So we have got to close off that spigot that continues to feed people into the state of unhoused. I also learned my time in the legislature working with housing advocates that the shorter we can create the duration of your first unhoused experience, the more we can increase the likelihood of you being successfully rehoused and staying that way. So we have to think about creative ways to keep people where they are. I carried a bill, very controversial in the legislature, that talked about housing vouchers, Section 8, veterans vouchers. And so many landlords in LA County weren't accepting them. And so you would get the golden ticket. In LA County, you could wait 10 years to get a Section 8 voucher. You finally get the golden ticket and you think, my prayers have been answered, and then you couldn't find anybody who would accept it. You've seen the ads, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, no Section 8. Well, we pushed back hard on that and stopped landlords from discriminating based on source of income. If my Section 8 voucher brought my income, monthly income on par with yours, then I shouldn't be discriminated against because of the source of my income compared to you. And so those are ways in which we've really had to talk to landlords, hear them, hear their concerns about how government can be slow and it takes too long to get inspections, to really push on every end of the spectrum to get to a place where it keeps the landlords whole, but we also are not discriminating against source of income. Those are the kinds of things I think we need to continue to do. I think when LA County voters, and thank goodness we all did, passed Measure H and HHH, I think people thought magically overnight we would no longer see encampments. And that's not the case.
That's not the case.
We must build because we are so behind in new construction in LA County, but we can't solely build our way out of the current crisis we're facing. We have to help people stay housed. We have to be creative in terms of how we define housing. Measure H and HHA said we had to build new housing. We couldn't use those dollars to like help reconfigure board and care facilities. And so that's, I think, was unfortunate, because I think that we have to think about all kinds of creative ways to establish community, honor individual dignity, and give people a place or space of their own.
And your point about time, I think, is incredibly important to discuss. And I don't know, because all of this can't take that much time. If you've determined that there's a line in the sand as to when someone is, been unhoused long enough that the chances of them getting housed is going to be a problem. You mentioned 10 years on a Section 8. You can't even register for one right now. They've had that shut down for 3 years. There is no housing to move into right now, and even construction is going to take a long time. How in the world is any of this going to actually happen in a reasonable amount of time to actually turn the tide?
We have to get creative. We have to look at construction and different kinds of construction. There are a number of units, buildings in the district that I have the privilege of representing that are using, the cargo
containers.
I had to go tour it. I'm visual, because in my mind it was just going to be a bunch of boxes piled on top of each other. And it's not.
No, Australia used it as an opportunity for recovery after an earthquake.
And the cost savings is amazing. Our Operation Room Key transitioning to Operation Home Key. Mm-hmm. That was another element that I learned in Utah or was exposed to. Transitioning, motels, hotels, taking 2 adjoining rooms, the amount of time and the cost to convert that to a 2-bedroom apartment that's already has, piping for electrical and plumbing, saves years off construction costs. Shared housing. There's a wonderful program in Santa Monica where seniors who are wanting to age in place still have that 4-bedroom, 3-bath home from when they raise the kids, don't need that space. How do we help them in a safe, comfortable way identify people who can come in and share that space with them? Mm-hmm. I think there are all kinds of creative models. We need to make sure that government doesn't get stuck in a one-track mind, and use our resources creatively to support all of these innovative models.
I do need to correct myself. I said Australia, but it was New Zealand that used the containers after the earthquake. Mm-hmm. You have championed a lot of interesting causes. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you mentioned transitional foster youth housing, et cetera. But you've also championed causes that may not necessarily be something that people would be aware of if they weren't a part of mm-hmm. the world. And that one of the things that I thought was remarkable was the Crown Act. And the Crown Act surprised me, mm-hmm. scared me, mm-hmm. and made me think twice. Mm-hmm. So in an era in which we're all quite sensitive mm-hmm. to equity and individual rights mm-hmm. and awareness of others that maybe we had been blind to, how did the Crown Act come to be, and what was it, and why was it important for you?
For years, when I was first elected to the legislature, we would see news stories about typically young black girls who'd been sent home from school because they went to school with their hair in plaits or braids or twists with beads. And after the second or third news story, I started my own little individual campaign. I'd write them a letter and send them my official legislative headshot, which is me with my locks. I've been locked for going on 17 years. Typical elected official pose, U.S. flag, California flag, I'm in a suit, arms folded. You know that picture. Mm-hmm. And that's the picture that hung of me in the Capitol for 10 years. And I'd send them the picture. And the point was, you are okay just the way you are with Aww. Your natural hair. Fast forward, I was at a national conference of black state legislative women, and we heard this presentation from the COO of Unilever, talking about this study Dove had conducted of black women and our attitudes about our own hair. And this notion that it's not acceptable for us to wear our hair in its natural state in the workplace. And so we began to put 2 and 2 together. I thought back to the early 70s where women were suing some of the more conservative sectors, banking and the airline industry, to allow them to wear their hair braided to work. And they lost those lawsuits. So we began to kind of look at the law. And met with some amazing black female law professors who had studied this, who understood the body of law in terms of protected rights, and understood that we needed to acknowledge that hair is a race-based trait. And because of that, it should be protected under the law, just like age, gender, sexual orientation, religion is protected in the Equal Opportunity and Housing Code section.
Right.
A couple months after that aha moment, we saw the young wrestler in New Jersey who was had his hair cut in the middle of the wrestling match by someone who was not his parent. And it occurred to me as a parent, and just the vicious way with which she literally attacked his hair, that the time had come to have a really personal conversation made public about black hair texture, about because of my texture, it affords me the opportunity to wear my hair in styles that are unique to my experience as a black woman, braids, twists, or locks. I acknowledged to my colleagues in the Senate that I'm sure not one of them ever decided that they were not going to vote on a Mitchell bill or a Mitchell budget item because I choose to wear my hair locked. My hairstyle choice had no bearing on the nature or the quality or the caliber of the work I do.
Correct.
And so the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, says that regardless of what your work is or you at school, you wearing your hair braided should not be grounds for suspension. And far too many black girls and young men were being sent home from school, not allowed to participate in their graduation ceremonies because of a school-based or a workplace policy that determined that only straight hair was acceptable.
And there are subtle things like that that maybe are not universally focused on or that we're aware of that make enormous differences in how we treat each other and in how we can improve our lives. Do you think there are other things out there that we're just not aware of that we should be paying attention to?
There are. I carried a bill. I was chair of the Legislative Black Caucus when I was in the legislature for a number of years, and I carried a bill about math displacement.
Oh.
And we were looking at the number of high school freshmen, black and Latino largely, who were being forced to repeat algebra after having completed algebra with an A or B in 8th grade.
Why?
Because the teachers just weren't convinced that they had mastered the skill set based on nothing.
Oh my, okay.
And so a Northern California foundation had done this research. It looked at how it impacted UC qualifications. That if you start as a freshman in high school at algebra, that you might not get to the higher mathematics courses that helps you get into AP classes. And so it was having an impact on black and brown admissions into the UC system. And so it was implicit bias.
Yeah.
And when we think about the role implicit bias plays in a variety of areas, I carried another bill looking at the African American maternal mortality rate in this state, and how many black women lost their lives through childbirth, in some instances unnecessarily, simply because the doctors didn't listen to them when they say something's wrong, and immediate action was not taken. And we've seen stories of very famous black women, Serena Williams, Beyonce tells the story. And so we looked at another study, of medical students who had these really, for me, frightening perceptions about black women giving birth, that we have a higher threshold for pain, that our skin was more difficult to penetrate in giving shots. Again, shocking to me, but again, an opportunity as a policymaker to step into that space and say, okay, so if you are involved in deliveries, you have to go through implicit bias training to make sure that the lens through which you view you or me as we enter the delivery room is the same.
So the reasons that you entered into the realm of politics and government, are these those reasons from the broad perspective of, you know, equity in terms of housing and opportunity to these delicate areas? I mean, is that where, because you transitioned from nonprofit and Crystal Stairs, which we probably should have defined earlier, but into this realm, did you see that this is the place for you to be able to make the most change? And have you felt that this has worked for you?
I think it's worked for me.
Okay.
I don't know that I was conscious of it.
Okay.
I think back to my parents met as eligibility workers working for LA County Department of Public Social Services.
Oh.
And I saw the role government played in the late 50s, early 60s when my mother was writing grants, when we were at a time very similar to now, when the federal government, after the Watts Rebellion, acknowledged that poverty was a problem. And that there were certain populations and communities that were suffering at a disproportionate rate. And President Johnson declared the war on poverty, and federal dollars came into state and local government. And so I've, through my entire life, have witnessed what government can do to uplift communities. I've also witnessed how government can create further division and blight and ignore certain communities. And so I think from a very early age, my son would say a strangely early age, I understood the role of public policy and how it could benefit. And then I understood, given the opportunity by Diane Watson right out of my Coral Foundation Fellowship to come work for her, that I could go to Sacramento and bring my life experience as a girl from Leimert Park growing up and bring that perspective to the policymaking arena there. That when some of my colleagues as a young staffer would, or making budget decisions or coming up with policy ideas, I could translate that to how that would impact Miss Jones on the corner of 49th and Central Avenue. And would that be a good thing? Would there be a good outcome for Miss Jones or not?
Right.
And so I think that's the lens that I've brought to my years as CEO of Crystal Stairs and now as a policymaker.
All right, at the risk of actually sounding like somebody who's asking you a question during a campaign here, I'm going to ask it anyways. What do you hope to achieve as a soup?
As I identified people to come join me on this journey, these young staffers, we spent a lot of time talking about establishing our office culture. And it was important to me that I was creating opportunity and space and hiring people who shared my commitment and passion for creating a second supervisorial district that we all are excited about raising our children in and growing old in. I'm a third-generation native, and so Los Angeles means the world to me. I look at opportunities that afforded my grandmother as a young mother, my mother as a student at Jefferson High School and a Trojan, and how those experiences led to a full career for her. And what I want my son to experience as an Angelino. And so, my goal ultimately is to be able to look back, hopefully, knock on wood, in 12 years, if I'm given the opportunity to serve, 3 full terms, and recognize that there is a first grader that entered school my first year who will be graduating from high school by year 12. What did we do in that 12-year span to create livable, walkable communities, to create more green space in her neighborhood, to make sure that she had the opportunity to enter a child care setting and a K through 12 setting that fed her, that saw her, that supported her in meaningful ways, that she will be able to come back to her community if she so chooses and afford housing in her own community, that there are grocery stores that marvel grocery stores in any corner of this county. Those are the kinds of visions I have for the 2nd District. I come on the heels of a visionary leader, the former supervisor, now Councilman Mark Ridley Thomas, who set his sights on health equity. We will continue that work, but I have taken the baton and intend to run full speed ahead to create that kind of LA County and 2nd District for that first grader for when she graduates from high school in 12 years.
All right, well, you're at the beginning of this this marathon, so hold on to that baton, and come back before the end of the 12 years, for heaven's sakes.
Absolutely.
And if people want to learn more about your district and the Board of Supervisors at large,
please check out my website. We work very hard to make it dynamic and relevant and fresh, and it's mitchell.lacounty.gov.
All right, well, it's delightful to speak with you, Holly. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.